Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Thanks for staying with us. As Tiffany says, we're the last panel of the day, but arguably the first point on the journey in many respects. We're talking about listening. So listening to the customers as a cornerstone to innovation and I suppose a foundation to a lot of what we've been talking about today. So I'm delighted to be joined by a great set of panellists. To my left, we have Heather Smith, who leads the marketing strategy for Aviva here in the UK, and also plays a key role in the digital unit for Aviva. And we've got James from Airbnb. James, prior to being at Airbnb, was with Google for 8 years, and then Tony, who's at Lloyd's, having previously spent time with Skype, and before that, various roles as data geek and sort of executive roles in corporates. So a great panel, and one well positioned really to comment on this topic. And so perhaps starting with you, James, just in terms of definition, listening is quite a broad thing. How do you think of listening at Airbnb?
I think this may sound somewhat trite, but it's the active listening. It's not necessarily customer survey feedbacks or small bits of data here and there. It's actually got to be core to the business. So it's asking questions, getting out, meeting people, giving a variety of ways in which people can give their opinions and look to actually have a conversation with people. That's really the heart of listening. And for Airbnb, this is where we're very much a community-driven company. Ultimately, Airbnb is the website which allows you to book a unique place to stay from someone who's looking to let out their spare room or their home, or it may be their igloo or their treehouse or what have you. And that means that we spend a lot of time in our community of both hosts and guests. So whether that's having dinners together in London or doing a meetup down in Cornwall to understand what some of the challenges are, to when we travel ourselves and meet hosts or welcome people into our homes, that having that personal connection is really important. And then when you think of how that starts to manifest itself more online, we've got very active forums where it's completely self-moderated by the community, and topics can range from help, I'm about to have my first guest, what do I do, to have you tried that great new coffee shop in Hackney Central, and just providing that rich content. But then where the community really comes in is actually the community listening and learning from each other. So if you think of the nature of online reviews, when after a trip, the host and the guest will get an opportunity to talk about the experience that both of them had. And that really is meaning that you as the host or you as the guest will be listening to the person that you've stayed with and looking to learn from them. So I think thinking of how you can bring the people who are part of your community and have them both, you listen and speak to them, but also how they can listen and learn from each other. And then when you move over to particularly social media, that's where it comes in even more, that it's in a great situation where you've got someone who's asking for, I don't know, they say they've had a bad day and they want to envisage their next great trip, or they're more tactically, I'm going away to Paris next weekend, where should I stay? That if you've got someone from your community, or other companies may call it brand advocates and such like, that if they're the ones who are going to be talking about what you, the company, has to offer, then that's actually a more real answer. And they may even actually look to draw you into the conversation. If we've had ones of that kind of, what should I go and do in Rio? And then someone jumping in and going, at Airbnb, what do you suggest? That's such a rich way of coming in.
Your business model allows people to do the listening for you almost. I guess a bit different at Lloyd's. You've only been there a few weeks, Tony. Have you worked out the Lloyd's definition of listening?
Well, I think what's interesting having joined the bank is that the first day I walked in, somebody put in front the values that the bank holds dear, and right at the top of the list is, right now, it's the customer is at the heart of everything we do, which makes actually it really easy. Because everybody's now lining up around that. And I know sometimes we think about those slide decks that we almost see in the large corporates as something else we just have to deal with, but it's interesting that it's on the front of almost everything you see in the bank. So moving from Skype to the bank was actually quite a natural transition in that sense, because Skype has a very similar model. So that was interesting that there was that. And again, from the listening side, it's very clear that I was on the Twitter feed today, just looking. and the engagement that we have with customers on Twitter is unusual for, if you'd have wound back 3 years or 3 or 4 years ago, those kind of conversations and engagement with customers wouldn't necessarily have been happening, where we're checking back and saying, you know, did our customer service desk respond to you in the right way? Did you get that? You know, it's a conversation rather than just a passive activity.
I guess that's something, Heather, that's close to your heart, of taking that information and making life simpler for your customers. Absolutely.
I mean, when you're dealing with a big organisation like Aviva, which has a large range of some quite complex products, and then there's a lot of customer listening to do. And our first big job was to take all the businesses and make it a customer listening piece. So that whole bringing together every aspect of the business, be it claims, be it the digital response unit, contact centres, frontline staff, all the social channels into one, and theming it up into the things that were most important to customers, was where we started. So that whole collaboration piece across our organisation. And of course, the theme started to mesh quite naturally, which is, I have my pension, you have my car insurance, you have my travel insurance, surely you don't need to ask me another question to underwrite me for health. And so out of it starts to get born things that make a real helpful difference. I think the main thing we decided you must always avoid is PRing what you do with good social listening and actually turning it into really helpful stuff for the customer. So Ask It Once was born, and that is, you know, the actuaries and the underwriters all took a step back and fell off their chairs and said, yeah, we want one common question set. So we're off on that mission.
So you ask the question once, you listen to the answer, you make a note of the answer, and then the organisation is able to then respond accordingly.
Absolutely. And that's manifested it in lots of really helpful ways, because we're on the cusp of launching pre-done quotes. Customer actually doesn't have to do anything, because we know everything there is to know to underwrite them, and they find that really helpful and interesting, not intrusive, because it's helpful.
Question there. At some point, you freak the customer out. Do you know too much? I guess there's always a risk of that.
They understand reciprocity. Yeah. They do, and as long as that is born out of helpfulness for them, they realise organisations are commercial. But what they've been very clear in saying, and in fact we're researching this right at the moment around how you turn the composite into real value for the organisation. They understand if we know a lot, but they should have value back from it.
So it's the value exchange. I mean, Tony, is that something which you've been thinking about? Yeah.
So I think, I think there's a lot about, I think somebody mentioned it earlier today about authenticity. I think so long as you're being authentic in that conversation and transparent about the reasons behind what you're doing, and I think that's critically important as you go forward. In a digital world where you're not necessarily sitting in front of a person, that face-to-face trust is really important to build in other ways. So there's got to be that engagement and transparency has got to be built up.
So a break from some of the other panels earlier on today, we've actually got a few slides to illustrate a couple of stories from the panelists, and sort of hoping to bring to life listening in action. So if we could click through to the first of those slides, and James, maybe you could talk to this one. Guys at the back of the, here we go.
So this started with a tweet from an American tourist, a guy from Texas, who was in Waterstones, the big flagship store, and I think somehow he ended up getting locked inside. The guys must have shut up for the night. He was obviously enjoying himself, browsing, looking around, and he was still inside. And he's got a very obvious request to be able to get that out, and this caused a bit of interest and obviously concern for the guy in question. And once it was all, once we realised that everything was to be fine, that the kind of conversation turned more to, well, what would you do if you were in a bookshop overnight? What would you read? Where would you sit? Where would you sleep? What kind of stuff would you want? And it was just something that was going along, and we sort of saw this was happening. That not that we're in the, I think in that idea of listening, that's thinking of not the necessarily mentions of your company, but what are the things which are values that you hold. And I think being able to stay in unique places is something that's kind of pretty core to Airbnb. So this got us quite interested. And then turns out it just started with a tweet of at Waterstones, if you're up for doing this for real, let's work together and make it happen. And so that's pretty much how it started. And the final point was what you see in the background, which was pretty much like a competition, which meant that people could win an overnight stay in that same Waterstones, but with a bit more decision about it. That you weren't locked in, you got a nice place to sleep, and also that other brands also got involved and were kind of happy guests to our party. So, for example, when discussion was going on, I think T-Pig said, "Oh, well, if you're going to be involved in this, you'll definitely want a nice cup of tea in the morning, or maybe a peppermint before going to bed." They were offering something, and Weetabix was similarly of, well, what's a better English bookshop experience than tea with Weetabix? What's one without the other? And I think this also highlights the nature of you can be becoming part of someone's conversation is quite like a personal thing. So you think of if you're seeing someone having a conversation in a restaurant or a party, how you can certainly become a guest there, but it's what you bringing to that which means that you're a welcome guest rather than an unwelcome one.
So if we're all wanting to achieve something like that, it would be great. And what does it take? What do you need to have in place? I mean, it's different from, say, Oreo's the Super Bowl when the lights go out. They're ready for something to happen. But that's a day in, day out kind of action that you've picked up on social. What does it take to sort of spot those and then react to them?
I think one of them is that nature of like, what are you listening to or for, or what's important and what's intrinsic to your company's values. So if we were going, we're only interested in when people are talking about trips or Airbnb the brand or things like that, then this wouldn't necessarily have come up. So it's thinking of what are the things that are important to who you are as a brand and who the people in your community actually, what they're interested in. So that's one. I think the other one is probably just if you don't ask, you don't get. And that it just starts with and we were very happy that Waterstones were interested in getting involved and other people came along. So I think it's that taking a bit of a risk. It could have gone nowhere, and then the ability to just actually make something quickly, get it out.
Okay, and Tony, would you notice if someone got locked in a Lloyd's branch?
Gosh, I'd certainly hope so. If they tweet it, I mean, we do have Ask Lloyds Bank, which is where you can ask Lloyds Bank to let you out, and hopefully somebody's listening to the Twitter feed on that. I'm not convinced that we had that yet. I'm certainly not aware of it. But I think that the point about actually having all of your colleagues, so in the bank, all of the colleagues engaged in actually supporting the customer at whatever time of day they're doing it, is really important to us. Even if it's trivial, like, for example, going to a branch and actually just offering a car parking space for somebody who can't find parking so they can sort themselves out. That, to me, is still listening. It may not be digital, but it's fundamentally part of the interaction that you want with the customer.
Okay. And Heather, thinking maybe it's on the next slide we have, which sort of taking a step to your world. Perhaps you could tell a little bit more about the rationale behind this and where this came from, because I guess this is an execution based on what you've heard, and part of this is the point for discussion, is really where that came from and what it led to.
Well, it's probably no surprise, and maybe many of you feel the same way, but car insurance is quite a commodity product, and nobody wants to overpay for their car insurance. And when we were looking at all of the insight, the fusion tools, the front line, and everything else, the biggest thing that customers said was, I actually don't understand why my price is my price. So help me understand it, and I might feel more satisfied about it. And that's what we did. So as we started to explain to customers, well, there's bits of it that are all about you personally and the things you do, but there are lots of it that are external to you. That are less in your control, but if you understood them, then they would help you make choices. And certainly one of the biggest insights that came out of it was that consumers didn't understand we don't care about the bent metal very much. It's the broken bodies that is the problem. And as they started to understand some of the real life situations that happen and some of the things that cause price to go up, such as some terrible, terrible things that happen to people, then they started to kind of have a real appreciation of the things they could do to take more control. And that's kind of lived on now. Pension reform is one of the biggest things, pension freedom now. And people are really confused. They are slightly worried. They know they have a pension, but they actually don't understand, really, truly, for many of us, what it actually means and what they should be doing with it. So one of the great ideas that our frontline staff came up with, having listened to all this with customers and having led, was talking statements. Actually somebody to talk through, so what does it mean when so much of it isn't in that fund and so much isn't in that fund, and I have to pay a fee for that platform but not that, and so on and so on and so on. So the next manifestation is how we take talking statements and bring it to life and help people really get to grips with their pension.
Okay, interesting. And if that's a response to something you've heard, we talked earlier on about another one of your initiatives where actually you've ended up sort of co-creating, so almost an iterative process of listening and responding to co-create a new product.
Yeah, it was similarly born out of a similar insight, which is make the price for my driving, for my car insurance, very individual to me, which is where we come up with the Aviva driving app, which records you over 200 miles around how you drive, how you brake, how you corner, the roads you go on, time of day, etc., and gives you a price more individual to you. And as we were creating it, we got the app so far, and everybody had lots of ideas about whether it was good enough or not good enough to go. So we got a co-creation team together of customers across the segments and the areas that we knew it would be most useful to kind of help us tell us what was wrong. Now, we'd missed the gamification bit. And what they said was, wouldn't it be lovely to have badges along the route that said, I've cornered well, I've done my 50 miles, I've etc., etc. And so we were able to really bring some enjoyment to the app and to its success.
And so if that's what working with the customers to evolve a product, James, is that something which you can play into Airbnb? Are there examples where you've done the same sort of thing, perhaps in a slightly different way?
Certainly, I think that the nature of your community and however that manifests itself, that they will be able to give you some really good sort of grasp of what they're looking for. I mean, I think there's the sort of Henry Ford quote of, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they'd have asked for like a faster horse or whatever. I think that's maybe a bit, and I'm not one to talk badly of a man who created the Model T, etc., but that I think maybe the questions weren't quite what they could have been. So if you had listened to someone, they probably would have said, well, I'd like to get from A to B, I'd like to do it quite comfortably, I'd also like to do it quite quickly, price is important to me, that those are the things could get you to what an automobile is. And I think that's similar to, I guess, the concept of Airbnb, in that it's allowing you to feel like a local and feel that you've got a home when you're not in your current home. And it's not that much of a leap of faith when the reason why we live in homes is that we kind of quite like them. So it's not the biggest kind of mental gymnastics to get to the stage where if you like it in general, then you'll probably enjoy it when you're travelling as well.
And do you involve your customers in thinking about where they might want to stay? Do you sort of explore that with them? So, what if you could stay anywhere, where would it be? Would it a Waterstone store? Yeah.
Well, in fact, one of the things we've done throughout a few different countries is this idea of like night at. So what can we do to unlock unique places for people to stay? So Waterstones was maybe more of the guerrilla example of that, but we've had ones of being able to stay in a Courchevel ski lift, or Galerie Lafayette, or at the Sydney Cricket Ground. Those ones. And one of the things that we did in the UK was actually asking our Twitter followers what would be the night at that you'd love to have in the UK. I mean, the answers that we got were mainly Buckingham Palace or 10 Downing Street. I'm not sure whether the previous panelists can maybe help engineer one of those ones. We haven't got, certainly not sure we'll have those anytime soon, but that's certainly a case of we know what they're interested in.
Yeah. But Tony, sometimes people get it wrong, right? I mean, if you, I guess, thinking back maybe to your time at Skype, I guess people's behaviour might not be quite the same as what they're telling you.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you'll see this as we move through the Lloyd's way of doing things. Is I think one of the things I learned from my time at Skype was that it's not just listening, it's engaging in a multimodal way. And what I mean by that is, first of all, if you think about some of even when you listen to a customer, to build on that a little bit, sometimes they will tell you what they think they want, and they'll give you a solution. So an example we saw at Skype was that we were constantly being told to improve video quality. You can only begin to imagine, it's like polishing the nose cone of a jet. You can make that video quality better and better and better. But what we started to realise was, and people came in and we started to listen to certain customers, and they were saying, You know what, actually, the instant messaging side is kind of where we start out with the product. Because we start there because then nobody really wants a video call as the immediate way of interacting. Most of us don't, right? I mean, the last thing you want is somebody going do, and it popping up, and that's the first time you see somebody. So one of the things you'll notice that Skype has spent quite a bit of time doing is making the whole instant messaging experience better. As we started to realise, when you come into a lab, we were saying, what do you want? And they were saying, well, Skype is a video product, so we want video to be better. And actually, when we sat back and watched people starting to actually use the product in the labs, the first thing they do with their friends is, hello, are you online? Open up their Facebook page, check what they were doing in Facebook so they got something to converse about. And then they'd go back to Skype and start the call. So again, you can see that we started to not just listen as in audio listening, but actually have the labs that allowed us to see how they wanted to work with the product.
That's very interesting. And I suppose from Skype, then taking some of that learning into Lloyd's, we had a good session from Mark earlier today. I was wondering maybe if we could bring up the next slide, Tony, if you could sort of give us a bit of a deep dive into one of the slides that Mark used, and perhaps sort of talk specifically about the role that listening or watching maybe plays in some of the thinking that's going on at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I don't think we're necessarily doing anything unusual, but I think what we're trying to do is put some more, I'm using the word discipline around it and rigour about how we do that listening. So we go through a typical life cycle, I guess most people are doing this now, where we do some experimentation, we create some hypotheses. And just as we do with Skype, one of the things as we hypothesise is it's easier for us to make assumptions about what's correct and what's not. And so we try as quickly as possible get a small subset. We've built a lab. We actually had Google come in to help us do some of the, how do we create these kinds of environments, which is great, and we all got excited about that. I wasn't there, so I couldn't get excited. But then when we do these experiments, we then think about, okay, how do we, when you get a small subset of people and they say it's really good, then we start to think, when you scale that solution, the laws of physics change in terms of the feedback. So I don't know whether, many of you are probably running experiments, trying to run experiments, and when you run it with a small set, you think you've got the answer, and then when you scale it out, you realise that your subset is actually your favourite customers who would love your product regardless, or all those kinds of things. And it's only when you go broader we start to get that feedback. So one of the things we're starting to look at now, for example, is how do we create feature toggles that allow us to take something out quickly, not just put something in quickly. And anybody who thinks that's easy, it is really tough. But doing what we call thinking about the concept of doing gentle releases allows you to experiment more frequently. So we're thinking about how we do that and actually pull things back as we start to scale out.
So labs, I quite fancy having a lab at our place, so we're way off that yet. You're not alone. You have a similar approach, Heather.
Yeah, we have an online customer panel, and we also meet with them real time. And since we've had our digital garage in Hoxton, they're in doing some co-creation with us as well. So it's a whole iteration. It depends where you are in the proposition development process, what kind of interaction and what kind of insight you need from them and at what point. But that ability to use the different kind of segments and customers all the way through a process has proven really helpful and really insightful, even in the small things, because one of the things they said to us, which we've just done, or nearly done, is saying, well, why don't, if listening and understanding customers and all those things are so important to you, which it absolutely is, why don't you make it all the things we say to you and all the nuggets and all the things that are so important available to everyone in the organisation? So everyone now on their Viva mobile has all the latest daily or weekly customer insight. Nuggets, sound bites, little voiceovers, anything that's come in, off ratings and reviews, live customer feedback. So you can just consume it really easily in your own time. And it's kind of making light bulbs go off all over the organisation.
So making a lab of the whole organisation almost. I guess your whole business is a lab in some senses, James, is that true?
Yeah, very much so. And I guess I mentioned this one, is it curated, the stuff that comes through, or is it pretty much just like a feed that people dip in and out of?
Both, depending on where it's come from, what source.
Very cool.
And so do you have a lab per se, or is it more about the whole organisation and the hosts and the guests as being an experiment in their own way?
And I think, it's a very it's all about sort of creating real interactions with people, and that I think it's somewhat of a company that is a hospitality company but has technology at its core, that we actually probably spend more of our time looking to get outside and meet our community and actually understand going on face to face and actually experiencing it ourselves. So it's almost maybe the inside out version.
And customer contact centres, I guess call centres and various forms have been around for a long time. I guess they're evolving, right? They're quite different propositions these days to perhaps what they once were. And I guess even how they integrate into the business. You talked there, Heather, about taking insights and getting them into the business quickly through the panels, for example. Does that extend into the customer contact centres or whatever you refer to them as?
I mean, typically, our customer contact centres are our digital transformation programme, because they can tell you everything that's wrong about any part of your digital process, because they deal with all the failure. So they're heavily involved in leading our digital transformation because they understand it. They have to deal with the consequences of it. And I think also they've got a lot of the best ideas. The one that I think has been quite transformational is, they said, you know what, if you'd only take the sales bonuses away, you'd get just as many or more sales and a much more satisfied workforce. Because actually, they don't do what you think they do at all. So through systems thinking, we removed all sales bonuses. And lo and behold, they were right. They were the wrong tool to drive the behaviour we actually wanted, which was if you meet the needs of customers, the sales will come, and all the sales incentives have gone.
Fascinating, and I think that sort of touches on what Mark was talking about earlier today. I think systems thinking, that if you simplify the process, it works for the customer and it works for the business as a whole.
Yeah, I agreed with that. And I mean, to build on Heather's point, I guess we have, I mean, our customer satisfaction team actually sit in the same offices as our development teams. And actually they have a formal session where they can physically, every week they go and they do a download and actually get together and talk about what the issues are, what the challenges are, and they cycle through those. But if they don't want to wait a week, they can literally walk up, go to the person and go, can this be fixed, and when can it be fixed? It's that immediate.
Okay, well, thanks very much, guys. I think that now's a time to open up to the floor and see what questions you guys might have for the panel. I think there's a microphone somewhere towards the back. Who's got a question? There's one over here. And as earlier, if you could mention your name and where you're from, that'd be great.
It's James Blackwood from ACCA. I guess for me, one of the big questions is, how do you decide which experiments? Because in ACCA we've got just under 2,000 people, but we've got a massive customer base for us of 600,000 people and a limited amount of funds. So it's great to experiment, but if we experimented and everything was wrong, then we'd be out of business fairly quickly. So for me, it's key, and maybe it's to the whole panel, as to how do you choose which experiments to proceed with.
Who fancies starting with that one? Tony?
Yeah, I'll take some ideas around that. So there's a couple of things that I would look at as we went forward. One is there's a couple of things that you look at when in a large organisation. I think one of the interesting things a large organisation can do that startups would struggle with is they can run multiple experiments because they can afford to. So I think it's a lost benefit. So first of all, don't kill as many as you think you should kill, but understand how you can experiment more and build an infrastructure that allows you to do that. Because trust me, the likes of WhatsApp is with 30 people can very quickly eat the lunch of somebody like Skype if they don't work out how to scale that. So first of all, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, I guess. And then the second thing is, I mean, we did something really interesting in Skype where we started to very quickly say, I think there was a conversation earlier around this that was around, we focused on the three things we really cared about, the three measures that the organisation was concerned about. And everything we started to do, we put a number, even if it was a barn door type number, small, medium, large, clothing size against some of those things. And we said, okay, we're going to order those things in a particular order and start at the top and work down. just to get us some, and yes, of course, the executives get all hot under the collar about, is it 1.4 times more valuable to do that? But it really doesn't matter at that point. The point is to start at the top of a list and work down and have some way of quantifying it that you can all start with.
And any other builds from you guys?
I think it's been quite hard because we've had all sorts of innovation running, FedEx's, customer cups, and the kind of couple of things that have been most powerful is how true is the customer need, and how much can we validate that. So how many sources have told us that same thing around the fact that that is likely, there's a grain of something in there, and secondly, have we got the right resources to pull off? Because the one thing that we've understood more than anything is you've got to release the expert resource to work on it and nothing else, and breathe live into it. Because we tried to do it with everybody doing it a bit off the side of their desk, and it's a complete failure. And so the kind of two principles was, let's really try and understand and validate the customer need as much as we can, and then let's see that we've got some expertise to put to it and put the two together and let them go. And we've had a few successes and a few failures. But our CEO will say, I am really happy if you fail fast. I'd rather we did something and failed fast than fannied about doing nothing.
And I suppose that talks to a really important factor for all of us in our various organisations. Having a senior sponsor who gets it makes a massive difference to then the extent to which you can have a punt on some things versus others. And I guess that's something which is harder to change, perhaps. Next question. There's one at the back and then one further forward.
Thank you very much. Christian Checker from Mott MacDonald. Question for you all, really, but particularly for James. Where you're introducing a sort of disruptive business model, how much of a challenge does regulation present, and how do you overcome that when you're trying to ensure consistent innovation?
Good question.
I think the disruption's often in the eye of the beholder, and disruption has connotations of, if you're the disruptive killing class, you're the one that means other people can't get on and learn, and you're causing difficulties. I think it's like we see ourselves as very much part of the travel industry, in that we're providing a different experience for people. So in fact, it's just technology enabling things that would have happened from the beginnings of travel, or even just thinking if your brother or your best friend lived in New York, you're more likely to go there, you're pretty likely to stay with them, and you're almost certain that you will ask for some of their recommendations as to where to go and what to do, because you want to understand and get under the surface of the city. That's pretty much the essence of what Airbnb allows people to do. So I think in that nature of disruption, it's it's disruption as a beholder. I think for regulation, certainly it's when you've got things which are new and you have laws. Well, regulation can only try and keep pace with technology and innovation. So we find that it's really about getting out and speaking to as many people as possible. So we operate in we've got probably more than 34,000 cities where we have listings in, but we look to engage with as many people in, whether it's government or the industry or regulation as possible, to actually talk about some of the benefits. And if you think of some of the economic impact, and taking London as an example, that for about 3/4 of our listings in London, they're outside of the main hotel areas, and that the majority of that spend stays within the borough, so that people, people in the boroughs and cities and governments are interested in how you can disperse the tourism proceeds more widely across the country. And often beyond speaking those terms, actually enables people to understand the benefit, and that it's actually not disruptive, it's additive.
Okay, thank you, James. There's a question at the front here.
Hi, Carl from Ticketing Hub. There's a question for James. In the whole innovation, what's the next step for Airbnb? You seem to have the most hotel rooms around the world, rooms around the world. Is the next step a concierge service?
So we're in the business of helping people to belong anywhere, and what we can do to help people feel at home when they travel, and really just making sure that people have those great experiences and living like a local. That's what's important to us. We're a hospitality company.
So you are looking into the hospitality around local information and city information, destination services.
That's what our hosts do. That's
the host, not Airbnb, like not you as a company. The host will give recommendations, but when you go to Hilton, you go to the concierge, and the concierge will give you advice. Is Airbnb looking to provide that kind of service without it being the host?
our hosts are they're the people that you stay with. You're choosing to stay in someone else's home. That's that you often make a choice to where you stay based on the host, based on their location, and you want to be able to understand to live like a local and how you're sharing their experience. That's how the local experiences really come together.
Cool. Thank you.
Any other questions at this stage? If not, whilst people are forming some questions, there's one for me. People in the room are all going to be at different stages in their own organisations of listening. I imagine everyone does it to one extent or another. But if we are to look at the first steps to take in doing it more formally, to go down the journey that you've all been on, a question maybe, Heather, thinking back to the beginnings at Aviva, how do you start? What's the first step in really taking listening seriously and starting to change the business model or to accommodate it? It's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we believed that had to be something we did in-house. So we didn't consider kind of any external, using any externals. But the first step was getting the data and the insight and the information, the streams and the feeds, and the frontline comments and the customer voice and the distributor voice into a usable format. It was you can imagine, in a large organisation, it was in many parts, many people's heads and spreadsheets and what have you. So that was the hardest bit to get started, was to make sure we had the right feedback, the right information coming through in some kind of consistent way.
So you made a decision. You then started to look at what data flows or what sources of information you could compile, and then it follows from there.
It flowed from that, and initially it was in quite a lot of product and business silos, and then we worked really hard to turn it into where this is common to segments or customers or groups. How would that change what you would do? So we spent then a lot of time kind of making it real and connecting it into our customer database and into our value.
It's maybe a bit early stages to talk about that in the context of Lloyd's, Tony, but any other sort of builds on that, a recognition that you need to listen, then looking at where that source of information is going to come from?
I mean, I'd go straight back to the point I mentioned at the start, which is, I think the main thing certainly in large organisations, is it's so easy to be distracted away from the customer. There are many meetings. I mean, you know, there were so many other things going on. So one of the big things for me when I walked into the bank was to see on a chart, the main thing, at the centre of everything we do is the customer. And that's the one thing you'll see, and it's not taken lightly. So I think that was really important to have that. If everything decision you make has to go back to that, then you have no choice but to listen, because the customer is key. The second thing I think was interesting is that the bank now is setting on these customer journeys. So it's looking at the context of when you interact with the bank, you're interacting as a customer with a number of jobs to be done. As a single customer, depending on when you're interacting with the bank, you want different jobs doing, but you're still the same customer. And therefore, you need to go through various journeys, but your experience with the bank should have a consistent, coherent, sensible point of view. And we want to listen to how are you getting that? And we're spending a long time instrumenting that so we can feel whether that's happening.
Okay, thank you. Has that prompted any more questions? There's one at the side here.
Hi, Vicky Barton, also from Lloyd's Banking, so hi Tony. I love the idea of customer listening, but more importantly, the insight that you drive from that. So my question is about interpretation. 2 years ago, we had a psychologist talk to a few hundred of our customers and really get underneath not what they were saying, but why they were saying it, actually the true meanings. Can you listen and interpret at scale, or do you need to bring experts in like we did? And that's to anybody.
James, maybe start with you.
I think it's possible to do both, to both listen and interpret, and pretty quickly. So if you think, I think it's thinking of, much like what Tony said earlier on, is like what's core to your business, what's really important, and how can you like set, again, whether it's the small, medium or large t-shirt size, what are some of the goals or metrics that are important to you, and then trying to see what the things which underlie that are, and then that gives you at least an opportunity to start in where you want to start listening, particularly if you've got lots of customer information or data that you can go through. So I think it's setting the objectives first, and then you can look to do the interpretation at least on the things which are important, and at least cut out some of the bits which maybe are for another day.
I think you've hit a really interesting nail right on the head, and a discussion we are having right now, which is we've come to the conclusion you need to bring in different skill sets. Actually, we think we need to employ, exactly to your point, people who kind of maybe psychologists, behavioural analysts, other types of skills into the organisation and into the customer experience team to do exactly that. We believe, to your point, you need that.
And is that about bringing them into Aviva as Aviva people?
Yes.
Or is that bringing them in on a contract? Or we had a question right at the beginning of the day about freelancing, which I get, and there's various forms of freelancing, contracting, and certainly I know in our organisation there are a number of brand teams around the world who have decided that listening can be done maybe by a third-party agency on their behalf. I get a bit edgy about that as a corporate comms guy when that agency can start to tweet or respond on behalf of those brands. But I think there's a sense from you, from the panellists here, that actually that needs to be brought in-house. It's about who you are and being true to and authentic to the brand. Is that true? Is there time when you can outsource some of this?
So, I know we had this conversation, and I tritely said on a call, and we all laughed about it. I mean, I wouldn't outsource my marriage, right? And this is the intimacy. If you want an intimate relationship with your customer, why on earth, it's going to end badly if you outsource it at scale. Once you get to a certain scale, I think it's a continuum, and I think there's some thoughts around what you might want to have some help with in terms of the behavioural analytics side of things, about doing some of the data analytics, etc. Yes, but I don't think that's personal. I think that's simply looking over the data. And I just wanted to, there's a couple of things I think some people might be interested in as a takeaway. There's a podcast on Invisibilia. So Invisibilia actually interviewed Facebook, one of the guys from Facebook, about how they use behavioural psychologists weekly to actually look at Facebook as a platform, and actually how they are adapting their platform. So that's Invisibilia. It's one of the podcasts, and that was absolutely fascinating.
You can find Tony on Twitter later if you want to get
I'll put it up on Twitter. I'll put a link out to it.
Thank you. Any other questions? We're just running out of time now, but any last questions for the panel? If not, I'm going to ask one about the final question for me, about risk. You can listen to customers, you can respond, you can surprise them. How do you draw the line between surprising them and I say making them feel uncomfortable? How do you make that call? Maybe James, start with you in the middle.
I think this is where you have that nature of almost what the listening is, and whether it's in real life, it's when you're having a conversation with someone versus the hearsay. And I think it's when it's the hearsay is when people start to get uncomfortable. So to take something which may be quite an effective marketing call or web design call of based on the last 3 sites that you visited, 75% of the people who last did that were like this thing. And yeah, it may work 75% of the time, but 25% of the time, the people will be going, well, that's not me. And if you're truly listening, then it's authentic in that style. So I think it's when people are, it's fully declared, it's a conversation, then people have interest in it. If it's we think you might like this, that's probably ones where it's not so much listening as analytics. And there's
the value exchange question, I guess, which comes into that.
Well, I think that's exactly it, which is if it's born too much out of your own commerciality, and there's not a useful, relevant and helpful reason for the customer, then they can sniff that out pretty quickly. So that's our balance.
Exactly.
We're the same. Yeah.
So I think that's pretty much all we've got time for. And thanks for those of you that have stayed to this last session. So just to wrap up, I think we've seen some great case studies from the panel. I think it really highlights the fact that it all starts with listening and seeking to get an understanding of the customer, whether or not you go as far as having a psychologist within the organisation as Facebook might. As you know, just starting to think right from the word go. But we've avoided talking about so much about what you do with the information. We try to focus on the listening part. But of course, it goes without saying that it's fine listening to customers, but actually it's really what matters. What matters is what you actually do with that information. Whether it's about deriving the insights from the data, and then being agile enough, responsive enough as an organisation to then do something with that information. We saw Airbnb did something pretty quick in their piece, and we've seen from the other panellists examples of where those things that have been heard have been listened to properly and been factored then into the core sort of fundamentals of the business and the value proposition to customers. So I think for me that's the heart of this, and everything we've looked at today is almost talks to those aspects of it's fine listening, but don't throw that data back into the sea or into your data lake. Actually do something with it and intervene and change what you're doing in order to surprise and exceed customer expectations. So I'd like to thank the panel for joining.